There's a phenomenon called revivalism. You guys familiar with it? There's a movement I think primarily in the 19th century. There were some precursors before that, but it was a move in Christianity towards being more spiritual. And the term Christian revivalism is how the term is traditionally used, but it's been broadened. It's like all religious scholarship used to be about Christianity because it was just the dominant religion in the Western world. And so Indological studies in the West just got started in the 1800s with Germans who had a fascination with all things Indian, even extending to Hitler. And so you could see that even with Hitler. So it used to be that, literary criticism and hermeneutics, rules for interpreting scriptures and rules for understanding how texts came about, it was all originally applied to Christianity because, like I was saying, it was the dominant religion in the Western mindset. So revivalism also started out like that. It was primarily referred to Christianity. But then the term's gotten expanded since that time. And now you can talk about revivalism in a variety of contexts. And so a revivalist movement can be a movement that tries to bring something back. Usually it's refers almost to usually a golden age before things became corrupted. And it's usually not used in a secular context. So it's usually spiritual. And there was a golden age and things fell apart and you need to revive it and bring it back. And so I think in a lot of ways you could describe the Hare Krishna movement as a revivalist movement. I think Bhakti in general could be described as a revival movement. The Bhakti tradition in general. And I'll try to explain what I mean when I say that moving forward, through the course of tonight's discussion. So you've got historical linguistics and literary criticism and revivalism and millennialism and millenarianism, all these different terms which get used now broadly to refer to global religious phenomenon. They all had their beginnings with studying of Christianity. And so millennialism was the belief that there's a golden age coming. It's linked to these messianic movements, like Chabad would be an example of this within Judaism, that there's a Messiah coming. Jesus wasn't the Messiah, but there is a Messiah coming. Or there's another Messiah coming, and there's a golden age, which is just around the corner, some kind of paradise on earth type situation. Millennialism, from like a milli or whatever is for the 1,000, and so it doesn't literally mean every 1,000 years, but every so often there's a period of time, and so paradise is coming again. Then there's millenarianism, also from the same idea of 1,000, but millenarianism movements or millenarism movements are they usually talk about there being some kind of a fire or a flood or some kind of massive, usually violent shift in society that's going to take place that will then bring in the golden age. And those groups, and again, originally, it was used to describe Christianity, but there's all sorts of other groups that do that. A lot of times they'll do like a mass suicide or a murder type thing, genocide. They feel that their duty is to bring in that flood or that fire. They can't wait for it to come. And so you got like the Heaven's Gate cult that was in the 80s in the U.S., in California, I think in San Diego, would be an instance of a millenarianist movement. They all committed ritual suicide so they could beam up to the mothership and go back to heaven. As a schismatic, bizarre offshoot of Christian evangelism in the 70s up in Costa Mesa. The guy got a start. If memory serves. And then you've got revivalist movements, which again, you got like the ghost dance movements within the Native American tradition. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. That's a phenomenon that took place when the Native Americans were being genocidally wiped out, and they got this idea that they were going to come back and they were going to revive. They did these ghost dance. They're going to revive things, bring them back. A lot of times these revival movements are linked to prediction and prophecy, and they are in a sense also millennialist movements, because they believe that by reviving this lost practice they're going to bring back that golden age. Then you got evangelical movements also starting with Christianity, but any movement that's really into proselytizing. You've got high demand groups, HDGs, which is the modern word for cults, because the word cult is somewhat, vague. And so then you've got these high demand group, which is trying to describe an organization which requires a lot of their membership and exerts a lot of control over their memberships, as a more of a modern sociologically acceptable term to refer to what used to be called a dangerous cult. Then you got terms like Neo-Hindu and its precursor Neo-Vedanta, which was an attempt by usually Western scholars to distinguish modern Hindu movements from older versions of Hindu movements. And I think the Hare Krishna movement could be aptly described as almost any one of those. So I think, if you look at, we're not a high demand organization in the sense that we use a bunch of coercive techniques, but going to law schools, being a part of a high demand organization, getting a medical degree, high demand, getting a PhD in general, high demand. These things take 50, 60, people work a job. If you want to talk about high demand group, why don't you take a look at your average job in corporate America, where they demand 60 hours of your time. Or school, where that numbers can get up to 60 or 80. My kid does jiu-jitsu, and if he doesn't go twice a day, the coaches start to say stuff like, "You're not serious." And each session is multiple hours a day. So they're demanding, as an extracurricular activity, essentially a glorified hobby, they're demanding, 4, 5, 6 hours a day of fidelity. And there's some sort of like physical punishment you might undergo if you don't show up. So one guy's high demand group is another person's, tribe. I think the Hare Krishna movement could be described as a high demand organization, at least just based on the etymological meaning. Then if somebody wants to give a list of what they think a high demand group contains, if they want to put some evil stuff in that list, then obviously I would dispute that. robbing people of their free will, using manipulation and coercion, not encouraging independent thinking. You know what I mean? Emotional blackmail. Like if they wanted to add some of those loaded terms in, but just the basic idea of a group that requires a lot of its membership, a serious commitment from its membership, we would definitely qualify. Then for sure we're a revival movement. The whole Bhakti movement is a revival movement because we didn't just start our own religion. Hinduism is quite unique in the world of spirituality, objectively speaking, because we're the oldest continually practiced religion in the world. You get, like Wiccan traditions or whatever, or, different pagan movements, and they bear little resemblance to their predecessors. People they pick up some tropes or some ideas or some runes or something like that, but then they recreate their idea of what the religion consists of. And so modern Egyptian religions, which are real popular amongst the black population of this country, or modern pagan movements, which are real popular amongst the white populations of this country, they bear little resemblance to the original traditions, which have died out for thousands of years, and somebody in the 50s or 60s or 70s brought them back. If you look at the Nation of Islam with Elijah Muhammad, it bears little resemblance to Islam, which is one of the reasons why Malcolm X defected from that group. Initially, it was because of the lack of moral character that he found with Elijah Muhammad, and then eventually it became that he actually converted to Sunni Islam, just traditional Islam, regular old garden variety Islam, as he wanted to connect more deeply with the Islamic tradition that he had venerated without actually understanding, having encountered the largely new teachings of Elijah Muhammad that were packaged as being Islam. Do you guys follow that? Hinduism, even neo-Hindu movements, the Bhakti movement in general, refuses to concede that, this is just some new thing that we're doing. And you'll find that within Hinduism there is, like if you look at the Purusha Sukta, the old hymn from the Rig Veda, you find that hymn showing up in later literature, like the Bhagavatam. And you find those ideas in the Upanishads, and then again in the Puranas, like the Bhagavatam, and then again in more medieval writings. And so you find these old ideas that were there at the beginning of the tradition being continually commentated on. And so you really have a tradition where there might be new innovation, there might be adaptation, but it's not that you're just starting from scratch. Buddhism tried to start from scratch, but even they couldn't, because so much of Buddhist philosophical language is borrowed from the earlier precursors. Hinduism, its parent tradition, that it wanted to schismatically separate from. It ended up borrowing so much of Hindu dogma. And so it does distinguish itself, but it didn't just start from scratch. It was a reactionary movement, a schismatic movement, a break-off movement. One that says, we have nothing to do with you guys. And so it's a little bit disingenuous. But the Hindu movements, which are called Astik movements, contrasted to Nastik movements. Asti means is. So Astik means like something that is or that has existence. Nastik means something that has no existence. Gnostic is usually translated as atheist, but it's not true. there are movements within Hinduism that don't believe in God, but they're considered astik because they accept the Veda. And if you don't accept the Veda, but you believe in God, you're Gnostic. So although you would say, usually the terms get rendered as theistic or atheistic, it's not actually correct, because an astik movement is one that accepts Veda, and a Gnostic movement is one that does not accept Veda, irrespective of what conclusions you reach from your acceptance and interpretation of the Veda. Do you guys follow that? Now, most Hindu movements, ours included, don't have a whole heck of a lot to do with the original Veda. Rik, Saman, Yajur Veda, what to speak of Atharva Veda. We have little to do with those traditions. We memorize some verses from them for the purpose of doing puja. But philosophically, we don't have commentaries on the Vedas in our tradition. We might have commentaries on select verses. Even the Upanishads, which are much more our cup of tea, the philosophical portion of the original corpus of the Vedas, the original Shruti literature, you don't find big commentaries in the Upanishads in our tradition. You find much later Upanishads sometimes we comment on, but like the big ones, Kathopanishad, Mundakopanishad, those Upanishads we don't comment on. Kena Upanishads, like the later ones. Chandogya, the real big ones, the old ones. Gopal Tapani Upanishad we might comment on, but the earliest one, but that's like, was written much more recently and just given the name Upanishad. But the really old texts, we don't find any Gaudiya commentaries on those things. Mostly if you look at modern day Hinduism, and even the Hinduism of the last couple thousand years, it's largely based on the Puranas, which are much later Vedic texts. Maybe the Itihasa, the Mahabharata, and the Ramayana as well. But we don't find a ton of energy put into the oldest stratum of Vedic literature. Mainly we accept that the newer literature has properly understood and repackaged the older literature, and therefore we're mainly beholden to and venerate the newer literature, such as the Gita, which is called Gita-Upanishad. Although it's not an Upanishad, they call it that because you give it that, you say that, and then it carries the same authority. In fact, the Gita is one of the Prasthana tribes. Shankaracharya, again, a very late figure in the 8th century, he said that, 8th, 9th century, I forgive my memory, that there's 3 texts, Upanishads, Vedanta, and Gita. And so you have to comment on those 3 texts. But usually nobody comments on the Upanishads. They just comment on the Vedanta, which itself is a commentary on the Upanishads. You follow? And then the Gita also becomes a commentary on the Upanishads. And hence the title Gita Upanishad. As a process of Sanskritization, where you give a younger book an older name, Upanishad, or Veda, or Samhita, and it carries with it more authority. You guys following all this? So, bhakti movements in general are new because they are revival movements. But they're not schisms because we don't say they got it wrong back then. We say they got it right and we got it right, but you guys right here got it wrong. So the original Veda taught no caste system. You guys taught a caste system. We're going back to the original Veda. Do you guys follow that? The Vedas venerated women and had them acting as priests. You guys start to mistreat women. We're going back to the original egalitarian, ecumenical. Devotion was prominent here, We have devotion. You guys got too much into ritual. The holy name was there in the beginning. We chant the holy name. You guys became too concerned with power and prestige and this worldly things. You guys following this? So then what makes a good revival movement is an ability to demonstrate a strong connection to that older tradition. You follow? And what makes Hinduism the longest practiced religion in the world is people bother to trace it all out. Now, we might not always go all the way back, but these middle literatures that we cite from, they go all the way back. And then we cite them. And if you push us to, we know enough of this oldest literature to point out what was going on here. And in this way, we really have maintained a connection generation by generation, going back thousands of years to the beginning of the Vedic revelation. You've got the Vaikanasa movement, the priests in South India who chant Vedic hymns as they've been chanted since the beginning. And it's not written. They do it through an oral tradition where the fathers teach their sons how to chant the mantras, and you can listen to just like perfect Sanskrit pronunciation and perfect chanda, the meters, and the rhyme and intonation and all that kind of stuff. You can hear that from these Vaikanasa priests that are connected to these old branches of the Vedas that they memorize from the time they're children because their fathers taught them to, and their fathers taught them to, going back 50, 100 plus generations. They can name their forefathers for 50 generations. And it's passed on. So they get the pronunciation right. They pass it on, pass it on, pass on. And there's communities like this. You don't find that anywhere else in the world. It's unique to Hinduism. So the statement that we're the oldest continually practiced religion in the world isn't, ill-gotten. It's not just words. It's not fake. It's a legitimate accolade. And although we might not spend a ton of time with the Veda and the Upanishads, our middle tradition did. And so if we need to go back, we can. And they've demonstrated their bona fides by commentating on that earlier tradition and keeping it alive. And so the Bhakti movement, egalitarian, ecumenical, God's available for the price of a song, Krishna's merciful, all-powerful, salvation belongs to everybody, women and children, everybody, no problem, high and low caste, rich and poor. All those ideals of the Bhakti movement, it's a revival movement. It's not saying you guys got it wrong and we're going to get it right. It's saying they got it right, you guys got it wrong, and we're going back to what they did. You follow? And then a good revival movement can trace it back. And we can. And we're unusual. We commentate on our text verse by verse. If you look at modern day Hindu movements, contemporary Hindu movements, they've largely given up this practice. What's known as Neo-Hinduism. Although Hinduism is always in a state of readaptation because it's staying alive every generation. So just calling it Neo is somewhat pejorative because it means you just don't like what somebody's done, so you're trying to say, hey, you don't represent the older tradition. And I do. You follow? It's a way to cancel somebody and criticize somebody. And so if you look at contemporary Hindu movements, generally their gurus will write a book or come up with 3 principles or 5 principles, the 10 this or that, and they'll come up with what's largely a new system, but which was informed by their reading of some older texts. Do you guys follow this? Happy, healthy, holy, or whatever it might be. Does that make sense? And then for their followers, yeah, they got the essence of it. We're not like those movements. We go verse by verse through our text. This is old. This is the way it's been done for a long time. Thousands of years. Line by line commentary. A commentatorial tradition that stretches back, like a rabbinic commentary tradition on the Hebrew Bible, like you find in the Catholic Church. Real serious attention to detail, that this is sacred and we're going to preserve it and keep it alive, generation after generation. And so you look at what Prabhupada did. Prabhupada spent a lot of time doing line-by-line commentaries. That's our tradition. That also indicates we're not just your average contemporary Hindu tradition, because we have this scholarship and this attention to detail and this attention to our sacred literature that is the very defining feature of an astik movement, of a proper movement according to Manu thousands of years ago, is we continue to venerate the sacred text. Now, it's not as simple as we're just repeating the Veda, because technically we're not. We're repeating the Gita, which is a much later text than the Veda. You follow? But if you push us, we can come up with the appropriate Upanishadic references to prove our point. And if you look even at our middle literature, it's incredibly beholden to that earlier literature. And so there's a great chain of being, a great connecting of us to our earlier tradition. So, the Hare Krishna movement is a revival movement. Bhakti movements in general are revival movements. But we're not willing to concede we're doing something new. And we're not just like the neo-pagans and neo-Egyptians, where we're saying we're doing the same thing we were doing, but really, there's no connection. Not like that. We can show you. We can show you. We're also a high demand group, at least if you don't include any really negative stuff in your definition. We're also evangelical, because if you got a good idea, why not share it? We're also millennialist in that we do believe a golden age is coming, that we can help usher that in. And whether the golden age comes across the world or it just comes in your own heart doesn't really make much of a difference to us. We're about creating a golden age, one person at a time. And we're also a little bit millenarian, not in the sense that we're all going to commit ritual mass suicide, but in the sense that we do believe in Kali and a cyclic period, and that there will be a natural degradation. We're not looking to foment that or anything. We're not waiting for it to happen. We're not excited about it, but it is there that entropic effect of existing in the material world is going to kick in. And we're neo, in the sense that we try to adapt ourselves and make ourselves, integratable into modern society. But not so much that we don't still commentate on our texts one verse at a time and look to get a real high level of acumen in our sacred literature. That's remained the same. And we're unique amongst many contemporary Hindu organizations by that. Did you guys follow all that? All right. Which brings us to a verse. Ya idam paramam guhyam mad bhakteshu abhidasyati. Abhidasyati. Ya, one who, abhidasyati, he teaches or explains. Paramam guhyam mat, this greatest secret of mine. What's the greatest secret of mine? the preceding statement in the Gita that you should become a devotee and that Krishna will take care of everything else. He calls his Paramam Guhyam, his greatest secret, Paramam Bhacham, Sarva Guhyatama, the greatest secret, the supreme message, and then 2 verses later this verse comes. And it says, if you teach that Paramam Guhyam, that greatest secret that I just mentioned, not even the whole Gita, but the final conclusion of the Gita, which was to become a devotee. Bhagavadgita, be a devotee. And that'll be enough. That'll be everything. Because Krishna will personally, moksha-ishami, he'll personally liberate you. Moksha-ishami is a verb. It's the verb of moksha. So it's I, it's future tense, singular. I will liberate you. So he makes that point, and then he says, if you explain this secret to the devotees, bhakti mayi param kritva, you've done the greatest bhakti. Bhakti mayi, bhakti to me, param kritva, you have done, having done the greatest bhakti to me, by telling people about this message. Then, mame vaishyasya samshaya. Without a doubt, you'll come to me. So, we've got a really powerful statement in the Gita, which is what I want to talk about today. And all that other stuff was so that I can say what I want to say and it'll make sense. And then the following verse, Nacha tasman manushyeshu kaschin me priyakritamaha. Nacha tasman. Not then him or her. Manush Yeshu, amongst all people. Kaschin, is there someone, Priyakritamaha, who is done more to please me? There is no greater pleaser of me than that person who has shared this secret amongst the devotees and done the greatest bhakti to me. Than that person, there is no one who's done more to please me. Bhavita nacha me tasmat anya. Nor will there be one. Nor will there be one who is priyataro bhuvi on this earth who is more dear to me than that person. Nor will there be another. Tasmat anyana, there will not be another than that person. And then tasmat na kaschin, there is not someone who is more dear to me, who has pleased me more than this person who's done what? Mad bhakteshu abhidasati. Explain this supreme secret to the devotees. This idam paramam guhyam, this supreme secret. That person. Mame vaisyasi asangshai. They'll come to me without a doubt. That person, bhakti mayi param kritva, they've done the greatest bhakti to me. And nacha tasman manushetu kaschit me priya kritamaha. No one has pleased me more. Na bhuvi, no one on this earth, no other. Na anya bhuvi, no one on this earth is priya taro, more dear to me. Than that person who has explained this core teaching of the Gita, which is bhakti. So, we have here an evangelical call to action by Krishna. That if you want to please Krishna, if you've understood the Gita, you'll want to please Krishna. And then how do I please Krishna? you share this idea that if you just love Krishna, that's enough. So just loving Krishna is the greatest idea ever created, ever come up with. And then sharing that becomes the greatest welfare work. And so it's the Gita itself is a revival piece of literature where Krishna attempts to make spiritual life really simple and really crystallized and really easy to understand. It's a revivalist piece of literature. Like all bhakti literature, is a revivalist piece of literature. And it ultimately makes a really simple point. You got an all-good, all-powerful deity, wants nothing more from you than for you to turn towards him. That's enough to open the door. We've got free will, so we got to choose that. But if you do choose that, Krishna will do the rest. Available for the price of a song, take you to a place where every word's a song and every step's a dance. And it's actually just that simple. And that is the most purpose-driven life. That's the most valuable life one can lead. That's an idea worth giving your heart and soul to, worth dedicating this year and every year to. It's the greatest idea anybody ever came up with. A beautiful conception of God and a beautiful, simple way, an elegant way. It's like E equals MC squared, but about theism. It's incredibly powerful, incredibly simple, elegant, concise, eloquent in the sense of truth spoken concisely. Elegant in the way math can be elegant when there's no gaps and everything's clean and each point makes the next one and the whole thing flows like a river. Bhakti is the natural consequence of what happens when you really believe in an all-good, all-powerful God. Sometimes you can get to an all-good God. If God's all-powerful, is knowledge power? Yes, therefore God must be all-knowing as well. God's all good because what stops people from doing the right thing or doing good things? They have desires. And those desires are contrastable to the good. If God is a limitless living entity, if he's all-powerful, is there anything to stop God from doing the right thing? No, and therefore from an all-powerful deity you can get an all-good deity. It does lead you into the Euthyphro dilemma, that goodness appears to exist separate from God, because you're talking about God being obstructed from doing the good, which means the good already existed. So you got to sing for your supper and then join those two ideas together, that God is the supreme good, and when God does good things, it's because those things are in accord with his basic nature, and God is goodness personified. And if you believe in the concept of good, why can't you believe in the person good? Because you just believe in abstract things. You don't want to believe in a personal manifestation of those things. But there's no good reason for that, especially not when you look at your individuality and then you look at the fact that you must come from somewhere, and therefore that source that gave rise to you would most probably also have consciousness and individuality. Now you get a conscious individual source of all reality, us coming from that. That source is the personification of all the abstract ideals that you venerate, which include goodness. And now God would act according to his own nature unless something stopped him. But if God's all-powerful, nothing would stop him. And therefore you can even get all goodness out of all-powerful, just like you can get all knowledge out of all power. Do you guys follow that? So the Gita presents a really simple picture of divinity. That God's all good and all powerful and all knowing and all loving, all that stuff. And then the natural response to that is that to know him is to love him. And that's the greatest secret. And if you want extra credit, you give that greatest secret to other people. And according to Krishna, bhakti mai param kritva, you've done the greatest bhakti to me. And there will never be somebody more dear to Krishna than that. Anywhere in this world. No one's more dear. That's the apex. That's the Everest. That's the life worth living. That's the life of significance. We should, therefore, do that. And we should give this Gita to people and introduce them to our tradition. But even better than giving this Gita to people is explaining it to them. That's the ultimate book distribution. You don't just take the book and give it to somebody, but you take the book and give it to them and then explain the book to them so they can understand it and put it into practice in their own life. We're a revival movement. We're a millennialist movement. We want to bring heaven to earth, one person at a time, by cultivating hearts and helping hearts grow that vine of bhakti back to Krishna. We're high demand. I mean, what do you expect? We're trying to make you saints. What do you think's going to happen? Who's going to listen to you if you don't practice what you preach? I mean, you think we're high demand? It's like usually high demand groups like demand like a lot from you for the organization. Like we're high demand in that we require you to do a lot at home by yourself when no one else is watching, to maintain a high level of integrity. Right? More even than showing up here and washing dishes or whatever. Our real high demand is we demand a high degree of character on the part of our tribe. And we want everybody to become clergy too. The door's open. Everybody gets to be clergy if you rise up to the standard. We're not trying to keep it as clergy and lay people. We want the lay people to also become clergy. So we're evangelical like anything. We want everybody to be a priest. We're revivalists like anything. Bhakti is the gnarliest revival movement you've ever had because it's from the oldest tradition and we just won't let go of the older tradition. And we're neo because we adapt things. But we're not neo in the sense that we gave up our core. In that sense, we're quite astic. We venerate the Veda, and we really mean that. And so all these, I don't know, generally speaking, semi-pejorative terms that are used as criticisms, there's actually good in all of them. There's actually good in all of them. You should find a group of friends that demand a lot out of you. That means you're in a good crew. They're bringing out your best. Not that you get to be all sloppy and hang out. You got to tighten up. And yeah, we're no worse than anybody else. I mean, you join your average box to do CrossFit, and they need you there at 6 a.m. every day. You know, working through all sorts of injuries. You know, and so yeah, we're not that terrible even in that regard. So yeah, those are my thoughts. What do you guys got? Give me some feedback.
Your explanation of our tradition, how we kind of establish our tradition through commentaries of different futures. It's something that I knew, but I didn't really see our tradition from that angle.
Yeah, we are a commentatorial tradition. The main way that we connect with our predecessors is through their commentaries. And some Vedic literatures are cryptic enough that without a commentary, you can't understand them. And those commentaries, the more you learn, the more you realize, oh wow, these guys were brilliant. They really made sense out of this. They really knew what they were talking about. I would have never seen that in a million years, but now with their commentary, that's exactly what the author was trying to do. I can see it. This revelatory text, that's exactly what it was trying to do. It just took a person gazillions of times more brilliant than me and more pure than me, and they just bequeathed it to me, and now I'm able to stand on the shoulders of giants. And so our connection, our appreciation to our commentatorial tradition is kind of everything. I mean, there is no Jesus without the apostles. The apostles' commentary on the miracle of Jesus is Christianity. If you believe in Jesus, what you really believe in is the apostles and their commentary on the life of Jesus. Where is the secular account of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance? Where's the video footage of Mahaprabhu to give us faith in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? The Chaitanya Mahaprabhu we're in love with is the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through the eyes of Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, and our acharyas. Even the Gita itself is Vyas Prasadat, by the mercy of Vyas. Why? Because Sanjay saw it. How did Sanjay see it? Vyas Prasadat, from the mercy of my Guru Vyas. Even the Vedic text itself is a commentary. It's a rishi, a seer who saw the text, who saw the revelation and then wrote it down. Even the sacred text itself came through the mouth of a man. Even though it's aparushaya, not created by man, some person had to hear it so they could write it down in a language you could understand. There's the sadhu, the pure soul who sees God. They write down their works. That's sacred literature. You live in the same generation as them. Now they're your guru. They lived in previous generations. Now they're your predecessors. Your parampara. Even the revelatory text itself came into this world through the bridge of a devotee's pen, mouth, eyes. It's all commentary. There's no way to separate the Lord from those who reveal the Lord. I guess you could decide I'm going to figure it all out on my own and do that reinvent the wheel thing. And I guess if you had no faith in anybody, nobody deserved you having any faith in them, that might make sense. But if there's people around who see miles further than you do, and they can demonstrate that, both through their lifestyle as well as through their speech, what fool wouldn't take advantage of that? That take it to the next level for you? I wanted to show you that, there's a call to action in the Gita. It's a call to action. A religion means you don't have to make it all up yourself. We give you a template. Like, what's your call to action? To help bring people to Krishna, to pass on Krishna's message. How do you want to do that? There's probably a ton of ways you can do that, and probably each one of us can come up with new ways that nobody ever thought of before. Maybe not. Maybe it's like, there's only so many collars, only so many cuts, and everybody's done it before. But why don't we just go ahead and stipulate that it may very well be that we can come up with new stuff, new methods of distribution that no one's ever come up with before. Let's go with that. One of the great things about a tradition is they give you a basic template of what you're going to deliver. You get to make it your own. You got to make the recipe yourself so you're qualified to teach other people. And as you make it yourself, your own flair gets put on it. But these core tenets, these core ideas, this credo, this basic teaching, it's perfect. You don't want to mess with it. It's a diamond. It's perfect. It's beautiful. And so we honor that, and then we think of different ways to present that, or to digest it, or to make it more easily digestible. We change the details, but we don't change the principle. We're rigid and fluid simultaneously. We're flexible on the details. We're rigid on the principles. And not rigid in the sense of we're not willing to entertain doubts. Rigid in the sense that at some point you're no longer in first grade or second grade. At some point you figured some stuff out. And you're not just starting from scratch. One time somebody said, to show Prabhupada, he's like, well, no one's seen God. Prabhupada said, you haven't seen God. Don't say nobody has, just because you haven't. So challenging. And then a reporter one time asked him, well, what's Krishna doing? And Prabhupada closed his eyes and opens his eyes and he's standing right now. And so, at some point, enough's happened in your life. You're no longer at the starting block. It's like if somebody tries to convince me my children don't exist and they're a figment of my imagination. It's like, all right, have at it. But I've got a lot of evidence to support the existence of my children. And so we can talk about it, no problem. I don't mind. Especially if I want to convince you that my children exist. I'll hang with you and entertain your doubts. But that doesn't mean I necessarily have doubts. You get accused of murder. You may know you didn't commit the murder. You may still have to present a defense for other people. But that doesn't mean you ever go to sleep at night and there's some value in you doubting yourself and what you know to be true. At some point, you know you didn't do it. And now it's just a question of, can you convince the other guy? So we can start humbly. That journey of 1,000 steps, 1,000 lifetimes. But by Krishna's grace, miracles happen and we don't stay at step 1 forever. And so one of the great things about tradition is a lot of this stuff has been thought through really well so that you're not just floundering around on some desert island with nothing, nobody. But you get to stand on the shoulders of giants and you'll see further than you could ever see on your own. And you realize, oh, it's out there. I just couldn't see it. Now I got on top of you. Now I can see it. Now I understand why you saw it too. Because I'm standing at your eye level now, even though I'm too small. But now I'm up at your eye because I'm standing on your shoulder. I can see what you see. Okay, all right, I accept. I didn't see it before. I'm sorry. Forgive my ignorance. I see it now. I won't forget. And I'm so grateful to you for giving me a lift. More? Loud.
The Gita verse that you read about the royal secret, and Krishna saying that, if you preach just love of God to people, it reminded me of Prabhupada once saying that any religion is a first-class religion if it makes you love God. But then you said bhakti is the consequence of believing in an all-good and all-powerful deity or God. And it made me think, how many religions actually say that, but their ideas don't match up?
Yeah, it's a problem. There's a lack of coherence. So I have to repeat what you said. So Prabhupada one time said the perfect religion is one that teaches you to love God. And that seems like a relatively non-offensive idea, at least if you're talking to Muslims and Jews and Christians, and they're not super antagonistic. Seems like a relatively Belfry. Thank you. Seems like a relatively innocuous idea that most people would agree to. But maybe if you got an angry Christian, you'd be like, love Jesus. Love Allah. You could see somebody doing that, hating on you for that. But let's say you got an ecumenical kind of somebody who's trying to be conciliatory and universal. Ecumenism is universalism. You want kind of one. Catholicism also means universalism, actually. That's why the Orthodox won't call Catholics because they refuse to accept that they are the one true universal church. Anyway, this idea of trying to, be universal and be welcoming. Then they say, yeah, we agree with you, Hare Krishnas, that any religion teaches you to love God is a perfect religion. But then you look at, their conception of God, and it may be lacking. And so that idea of loving God, if God would make somebody and give them a congenital heart defect, and they didn't deserve it, right? And then give their sibling not a congenital heart defect, and those two created beings were equal, what would we think of a parent who cursed one of his children to die, and he proved he didn't have to do that because the other child was allowed to live? What would we think of such a parent? They were horrible. Should be imprisoned. How are you going to love a God like that? How are you going to trust a God like that? You can fear a God like that. But love and trust, I don't think it's possible. And so one of the benefits of our conception of divinity, and we're not necessarily the only group that can have this conception of divinity, but one of the benefits of our conception of divinity is we make it relatively easy to fall in love with God because we present a picture of God as being all good and all loving, and therefore worthy of our love and also capable of reciprocating with it because of the all-powerfulness. Worthy of it because God is all-loving, and capable of reciprocating because he's all-powerful. And so that idea of a healthy conception of divinity is gold. It's also diamond-like. All right, one more.
I thought it was interesting. So you read the verse in the Gita, and correct me if I'm wrong if I misheard you read the verse, but did it say that bhakti to God was to explain the secret to the devotees?
Yeah. Ya idam paramam guhyam mad bhakteshu abhidasyati. He will explain this to the bhaktas. Bhakteshu means to the bhaktas. Mad bhakteshu means to my bhaktas. The preceding verse says you're not allowed to explain this to someone who's not a devotee. And so, but it also says you can't explain to someone who's not sushushravya, who's not submissive or willing to hear, who's not tapakshaya, who's not austere. And so this means that you don't want to cast pearls before swine. And so certain special features of the Gita, certain beautiful ideas, if they're prematurely given to somebody, they won't appreciate them. And so part of the devotee's dispensation, the part of the devotee's empowerment is to bring people to a place where they can hear the full message, which may involve warming them up to the idea over time and not giving them everything all at once. May also involve taking risks. May also involve not following Krishna's instruction directly and making people more fortunate than they deserve to be. It's interesting that, Krishna empowers his devotees to spread his message. Love for Krishna belongs to the devotees. Their love for Krishna. We good? Mm-hmm. Love for Krishna belongs to the devotees. And so their love is given to us. So in some ways, it's the most appropriate thing, is that Krishna's devotees give us their love. If Krishna gave us love for him, it's not quite the same. He's himself. And so even involving the devotees from a logical point of view makes a lot of sense. That's our empowerment. So there's a million ways you can interpret it. That you teach the devotees, and being a devotee means being relatively favorable, or having achieved enough advancement that you can understand the main message. Or maybe the greatest secrets are waited till you get a little further along, and we have to scale it so that they're also brought through, like the Gita brings things through till they can eventually hear that highest message. Or some austerity, some submissiveness. They're not casting pearls before swine. Or being more merciful than Krishna and stepping into somebody's life and making a miracle. Because bhakti makes you behave in such erratic ways. And throwing yourself into harm's way to help another person beyond what they deserve, just because you can. Does that make sense? It even resolves things like, why doesn't everybody get this message equally? Well, they don't want the message, number one. That's an easy answer. But another one is, well, if Krishna's devotees are required and we're limited, that doesn't mean God's limited. The only way that love of God can spread throughout this world is through the devotee, right? Then Krishna's limited. It's not his fault. He created free beings, so he's not absolutely omnipotent, because absolute omnipotence would mean predestination was an absolute fact, which it's not. He created us with free will, therefore he's not responsible for what we do. And therefore the limitations that we present of not being able to spread bhakti everywhere to all people at all times no longer reflects poorly on Krishna. And we can resolve that issue just like we resolve the problem of evil. Did you follow that one? There's a bunch of ways you can turn that frown upside down and turn what apparently is a dushana or a fault into a bhushana or an ornament. Or take something which would seem to create circular logic and resolve it in a way which actually makes it profound. All right, we're done. Let's do a little kirtan. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we'll be back in person next week. Hare Krishna.